Today on CityCast Nashville, can independent and corporate venues coexist? The Department of Justice settled its antitrust lawsuit against Live Nation yesterday, but the challenges facing Nashville's smaller clubs are likely to persist. I'm joined by Chris Cobb, president of Music Venue Alliance Nashville, and John Grau, artist manager at 30 Tigers, to talk about our city's live music ecosystem and what's at stake for artists and audiences alike. It's Tuesday, March 10th. I'm your producer, Daniel Sumstein, and this is what Nashville's talking about. How would you describe the venue ecosystem in Nashville a decade ago compared to what it is now? What's changed the most?
What a great question. There's a lot more corporate venues now than there were 10 years ago, I think is a big change. And I think the cost of rent, I think rent has increased 78% commercial in Nashville in the last decades. It's pretty significant.
Yeah, I would add on to that. And to be clear, this is an issue, I think, nationally too, but of course affects venues in Nashville. Venues post-COVID they're forced to do so many shows, especially the smaller venues. Some of these venues do 2, maybe even 3 shows in a night, 300 shows a year. And so everyone is incredibly strapped for resources. Their ability to take the time to invest and really focus on marketing any one show is really dramatically reduced right now. You see venues like the 5 Spot or the End needing to do Kickstarter, GoFundMe type things just to stay afloat. And you just didn't see that kind of thing as often 10 years ago.
At the same time, Nashville is really booming with these new venues. Tons of tourists are coming here. But who is that growth actually serving?
What an interesting run it's been here in Nashville, right? Especially, I think, since COVID. And it feels like whatever peak there was to reach, I think, has been reached. And we're now coming back down the other side of this crazy last 6 years that has felt like 20 years. To your point, this incredible boom has taken place in tourism here, extending past COVID, but just thinking about the last 6 years, exponential and significant. The number of stars' names on new bars on Broadway has grown significantly. And now we're starting to see them close, right? I mean, John Bon Jovi's was the first one to go down. There's rumors of another big name country artist operation on Broadway that's going to file bankruptcy here this quarter. I think 30% down is kind of the talk about numbers in Lower Broad for 2026. Down this year off of a year that was already down in 2025 by maybe 10%. So very interesting. I think we're going to start to see some significant correction down there. Obviously, property tax is something that we could get into. That's a very current conversation when it comes to Broadway and Acme right now. But what do you think, John?
Everything feels way more boom and bust. It feels like you see a tremendous amount of investment in big ideas that, 2 years later flop and disappear. Meanwhile, a lot of the sort of more local serving venues are struggling a lot. There's not as much attention or investment paid to those things. Generally not as much attention and investment paid to what serves locals in general. There's a lot of focus on tourism and keeping that money flowing in and keeping the people who are visiting Nashville happy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you touched on the 5 Spot. There's also the End. We saw a crowdfunding campaign, Dark Matter. What does it signal when these local, well-loved independent venues have to rely on emergency community funding just to stay open?
It signals a very challenging landscape, which I think goes without saying. But then I think if you take it a step further, it signals instability. And it signals instability for trusted long-term owner-operators, people who know what they're doing. John, you mentioned boom or bust, and there's this big new thing over here. Well, a lot of times those aren't music people that we've seen doing that have entered the space. I think another conversation, but there was maybe a target put on the backs of some of these types of operations and businesses during COVID, this big moment, and some predatory business people entered the picture, and that's a tale as old as time, and we see them fail a lot. But when we're seeing Bruce Fitzpatrick at the Inn, who booked the Chili Peppers at Exit Inn in 1984 or whatever, has owned and operated multiple venues across the city, since before some listeners were probably alive, that's not a case of somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, right? That's a case of somebody who's faced with unprecedented challenges that, as savvy as they are to operate for 40 years, can't figure out how to overcome them. That tells me that there's something wrong that needs to be addressed from a policy perspective, that needs to be addressed from a leadership perspective, if Nashville actually cares about the live music that happens in Music City.
Yeah, and I would tack on to that. There is a larger framework here, or a larger issue going on with the music industry in general, both in Nashville and internationally, really, where there's basically been this very steady hollowing out of the musical middle class. And honestly, it mirrors a lot of what's going on in the broader economy, right? You have more and more people who are tremendously successful at the very top, but it's still a tiny number. And you have more and more people who are struggling immensely at the bottom, but that wide breadth of people in the middle who could make a living, maybe even get kind of wealthy, or maybe make like whatever, a teacher's salary. It's getting harder and harder to exist in that middle space as an artist. It's getting harder and harder to exist in that middle space as a venue owner or a promoter. And there are solutions, but people seem to be leaning into the trend of making it harder on purpose.
Who are some of these like big commercial promoters in town, and which venues do they operate?
Well, I mean, Live Nation's the biggest one in the world, with a lot of activity at Bridgestone, probably the only shows that happen at either of the stadiums, football or soccer. So definitely the biggest concerts that play the market are going to be them. And you mentioned Brooklyn Bowl, that's Live Nation. And then number 2 would be AEG, with the brand new 4,000 cap-ish venue, the Pinnacle. Remember when venues used to have names of their own and weren't named after banks?
Yeah, it wasn't just a bank.
Those were good times. I like to say Nashville is kind of the front line of the war of attrition between those two companies. Opry, obviously, is a huge player here. Just took the Ascend. That was a 10-year deal with Ascend and a 10-year deal with Live Nation for the first 10 years of operating our Riverfront Amphitheater. That ends now, and Opry is in a transition of taking that property over from Live Nation. So they're obviously a big player in the space with the Grand Ole Opry and Ryman Hospitality. And then now we have the folks that I alluded to earlier, I guess, that are entering the picture here, like real estate developers that have kind of forcefully taken over some venues in town and are trying to operate them themselves. And they like to use the word independent. Mercy Lounge, that's been taken over by a local development firm recently in the last couple of years. And then Exit In is the other one, where that parcel was bought by a large developer called AJ Capital Partners that is now operating that venue. And then we have, a handful of truly independents. Typically, I would think of them as like Main Street businesses, as a term that's thrown around, or mom and pops, but these are really typically very small, oftentimes family operations, 1-2 people that, that run these things. The Five Spot, the End, as discussed, but even Acme down on Broadway, that's the Morales family. It's Tom and his daughters run that place. So it's fun. It's a big, wide net.
My favorite place in Nashville to take friends from out of town is the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. It makes me feel so proud to be able to show off our city's country music roots. But y'all, it's not just a tourist attraction. Did you know that local kids always visit free at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum? Kids age 18 and under who are residents of Davidson and bordering counties, including Cheatham, Robertson, Rutherford, Sumner, Williamson, and Wilson, can take advantage of all the engaging and educational activities the museum has to offer this spring at no cost. Plus, they can bring 2 accompanying adults who get 25% off admission. I love the museum's Taylor Swift Education Center. They've got music, dance, art programs, and on Fridays this month, you can check out Irish step dancing, a musical instrument petting zoo, and plenty of other fun activities. Learn more and plan your visit at countrymusichofoffame.org/local-kids. Hey, did y'all miss the sold-out world premiere of Dolly Parton's Threads, My Songs in Symphony last year? Well, do I have great news for you. You have another chance to see it.
March 19th through the 21st, this incredible concert returns to the Skirmerhorn Symphony Center, where the Nashville Symphony and guest vocalists will bring Dolly's biggest hits to life. We're talking Jolene, Coat of Many Colors, I Will Always Love You, all backed by a full orchestra. And Dolly herself will be there too on the big screen throughout the show, sharing the stories behind the songs that shaped her life and career. It's a stunning multimedia celebration of a living Tennessee legend. And let me tell you, you do not want to miss it this time. Dolly Parton's threads My Songs in Symphony with the Nashville Symphony, March 19th through the 21st at Skirmerhorn. Get tickets now at nashvillesymphony.org.
The Department of Justice, along with 39 states, has argued that because Live Nation also owns Ticketmaster, it can use its vertically integrated business to crush its competitors, an allegation Live Nation has consistently denied. But for our listeners who might be less familiar with the business side, can you explain how Live Nation and Ticketmaster shape our ticket pricing access and revenue? Like, how does this impact artists and fans?
I will say up top, I, as a manager, have worked with Live Nation and AEG many, many times successfully, and they've been incredibly supportive of my artists. There are people at those companies who I love working with and those venues who I love working with. But there are certainly long-term practices that go on and decisions made at a very high level that I think are detrimental to the industry at large and in the long term for sustainability. I think contribute a lot to that hollowing out of the middle class. You know, a specific example of the sort of monopoly thing you're talking about that I find particularly disturbing. One of those two companies up in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, there's an independent promoter there who's been there for years. And there was for years an independent promoter in Madison, about an hour away. Two of them both very successful. The two of them both had very much like an unspoken agreement about, hey, we'll stay in Madison, you stay in Milwaukee, our two paths won't cross and we're all happy, right? One of the two major promoters purchased the one in Madison. And within a few short years now, they are building a 4,000 cap venue literally across the street from the 4,000 cap venue owned by the local promoter. And you can talk about competition or whatever you want to talk about in terms of fairness, free market, yada, yada. But what's going to happen is that new venue will be able to over offer on every artist they want to book because they can afford to lose the money on the shows. They'll offer big guarantees for artists that they shouldn't be offering those guarantees for so that the local promoter doesn't get the show. That's all subsidized by whatever they've got, their corporate stuff, all the complicated corporate stuff.
Right.
They can subsidize losing money on those shows. The local promoter will lose out on a lot of great shows. They'll probably eventually be unable to keep doing what they do and either get purchased by the big promoter or go out of business outright. Now, I don't want to write that death sentence for them. I think they can survive it. They're scrappy, they're smart, they're talented, and they've built a lot of wonderful relationships over the years. But that's very much part of the business model in that ecosystem is, hey, we can build a flashy venue right across the street from your venue, and we can lose money on shows left and right, so that eventually we put you out of business and we're the only show in town.
If you care to Google it and look at the Tennessean article from 15 years ago, I mean, I was told that by a Live Nation executive when they were trying to buy my company here in Nashville, and it made the front page of the Tennessean. And that individual's been subpoenaed to testify before Congress in the current case 15 years later. It doesn't stop it. That is what they do. They'll tell you that's what they do. I think the singular issue that really is negatively impacting fans and artists the most, it's the dirty business that's happening in ticketing. That one to me is just so detrimental, and it's fixable. And is the DOJ going to break up Live Nation in this current case? None of us know. I think probably not, but that's just me. I hope I'm wrong. But are we going to see mass ticketing reform soon? Yeah, we are.
Yesterday, the DOJ settled its antitrust case against Live Nation, requiring the promoter to pay nearly $300 million to the states involved in this suit, including Tennessee. According to Variety, the settlement also requires structural changes within Ticketmaster, but it does not require Live Nation to separate from the ticketing giant. Tennessee has joined 25 other states in refusing to accept the settlement, with New York Attorney General Letitia James stating, "We will keep fighting this case without the federal government so that we can secure justice for all those harmed by Live Nation's monopoly."
Hi, I'm David Plotz. I'm the CEO of CityCast, a podcast network that includes this show you're listening to, and also 12 other CityCasts in 12 other cities. And each one knows their city as well as your local team knows yours. So isn't it time we connected them? Don't you want to know how they're tackling their bike lane problems and housing challenges and sidewalk dog poop crises? That's why I'm hosting a new podcast called Your City Could Be Better. Because it could be. Every week, I'll chat with a different host in our CityCast network about what their cities are doing right and wrong, the weird things they're trying, and the surprising successes, so that we can all learn how to make our cities a little bit better. Listen to Your City Could Be Better on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Chris, you were instrumental in creating the Tennessee Live Music and Performance Venue Fund back in 2024. Can you tell us what that does and how it's been going so far?
Well, it started going great when we passed it in 24. It's a really good framework for grant funding to go to independent venues and promoters and artists across the state of Tennessee. So it started out really grand in 2024, and it is set up to be very successful. However, over the course of the last 18 months, we have failed to get any funding into it. So it exists, it's set up well, and it would love to give money to people across the state who need it to work against these rising costs, this incredibly difficult kind of landscape that we've been talking about here. But we've got to get a funding model in place to put money in it so that it can do that.
Can I ask why it has no funding? And is there anything like our listeners can help out with that?
It has no funding because nobody wants to give any money away. Is the real high level dumbed down answer. To kind of dig into the weeds a little bit. The fund passed very quickly in the legislative session 2 years ago in 2024. And we were a little caught off guard and didn't have a funding plan at that time because we didn't think it was going to happen so fast. And it was great. And we were very excited that it passed and that it exists, and very thankful for that. So then we had to create a plan to get it funded. And we worked for a year on getting built into the governor's budget. The governor gets to each year present before the Tennessee legislature what's called the governor's budget, which is some earmarked line items that his or her office gets to determine how those funds are spent. And we were told that we were going to be in that budget this time last year. And then when that budget came out in late February, early March 2025, we were not in it. And so once again, we were kind of caught off guard. And so we've been working since that time on a new model. We need a sustainable, ongoing funding source. We have some stuff that we're working on right now that we'll know here pretty soon if we're going to be successful. And hopefully we are. And hopefully that's the way it was meant to be, even though it's taken longer. And as far as, is there anything listeners can do? Yeah, you can always call your state reps or email your representatives in both sides of the house in the state of Tennessee, and you can tell them that you support the Live Music Fund and that you want them to support the Live Music Fund because they're going to have an opportunity to vote on a piece of legislation very soon that would fund that and distribute those grants.
Is Metro Nashville doing anything to help support these independent venues? I know we saw the free parking through Metropolis, but it seems like much more is needed than that.
Man, if our mayor could be any less helpful, I would be shocked. Just to be really clear about things right now, the DJ sets are getting old. I'm tired of it. And I think a lot of us in the music community in Nashville have been really hopeful Mayor O'Connell was going to do anything to support arts and culture, specifically music. And unfortunately, right now, he has done things that have been significantly unhelpful. So it's a shame. We do have an Office of Nighttime Economy, the Office of Nightlife. It's a fairly new office. It's a few years old that lives inside of Metro government. They try to be as helpful as they can to work on practical things like Narcan distribution around town that does save lives. So there's positive movement there with that office. There's a commission that is about to hire a director that'll live with inside Metro government that's supposed to work on music and film and help those industries, again, navigate this really challenging landscape that we're faced with right now. But the reality is that Metro Nashville has really just kind of not showed up to the conversation since COVID.
Can you give an example of something that's been hurtful?
Yeah, property tax increase. And Metro wants to point the finger at the state, and the state wants to point the finger at Metro. But the reality is that if either of those bodies really wanted to fix it, they could work on it. But, the $122,000 to $600,000 property tax on Acme is not okay.
John, I want to talk about the touring industry from a Nashville artist perspective. So for musicians who are based here, how hard is it right now to make touring financially make sense? Like, what has changed in the industry in terms of guarantees, merch cuts?
In the way that we promote anything, so much has changed, right? So you've seen over the last decade, and certainly a huge speeding up in the last 5 years or so of the change in media ecosystem, right? So you have diminishing effects with print media and many newspapers and weekly magazines going out of business outright, right? You've got diminishing reach with radio or television ads, traditional media, basically. You had the advent of social media coming in and sort of promising artists the keys to the kingdom. Like, hey, here you go. You can reach your fans directly. And that worked for a millisecond. And then those tech companies basically restricted the algorithms so that you had to pay to reach the people who follow you. Maybe you had 100,000 followers, but you'd post and it would reach 2% of them. So you had to pay to unlock further reach. And that was not great, but it was what it was. And now what you have is the algorithms designed in such a way that they're sort of rage baiting, right? Like most of what I follow on my Instagram account is artists I like, my friends and family. But most of what I'm fed any day while I'm scrolling is stuff pretty much designed to make me upset in some way or another. So my favorite artist might announce a tour, and I might be very interested in going to that tour, but I may never see it. I may never know that it exists because one of the sole outlets I have to understanding and knowing that the tour's happening is social media, and it's not feeding it to me. And then, you're dealing with venue ecosystems in every city that are pretty much as strapped as Nashville is. And so you book a tour, say it's 10 shows, most of those venues are going to have a hard time giving the time and energy to promoting your show that you might hope they would. Most marketing conversations revolve around, can you send us more clips? Can you send us more video? Can you send us more this? And as an independent artist, you can create so much of that before your time or your money run out. I think just the process has become really deflating for a lot of artists. There's so many factors at play, but that's really to me, what it boils down to is, as an artist, it is now more difficult to reach people than it's ever been. Part of that is what the tech companies are doing. And part of that is the spaces you communicate through are so clogged. There is a lot of noise to try and break through. And I think that is the biggest driving difficulty that trickles down in many, many ways.
If independent venues continue to disappear, what happens to artist development in Nashville? And are we at the risk of becoming a city that hosts music rather than grows it?
You can think about small independent venues like the feeder system in sports, right? Like this is where the talent is born, and it's where it matures and learns the craft and builds fans so that it's ready to take the big stage, right? Like the greatest artists in the world didn't go from 0 to 100 overnight. That's just never how it works. And in the few situations where maybe it did work in some way like that, typically they were pretty unprepared for success and, suffered some seriously negative consequences, mental health problems, bad financial decisions. So I think coming up through independent venues and smaller venues is essential to an artist's career being successful down the line. And when that opportunity disappears, so does the talent.
I think we can end on a positive note. I think we're going to fix it. I think Nashville, I think Tennessee, I think there are a lot of us who care enough that we can come together and overcome these challenges. We're not the first boom city to displace its creatives and figure out how to ensure that that doesn't continue to happen. We're not even the first one in the southeastern United States. So, there are models out there that help and work. We move forward and we cannot go back. It doesn't work that way. We can do it. So I think we're going to be okay. It's hard. It's rocky and it's been crazy getting there, but I think we're going to figure it out.
Yeah. When I started working in the industry, it was sort of the tail end of the Napster era. And I was a young professional starting out. And a lot of the older folks I talked to were sort of like, oh, I'm sorry you missed it. Like, the music business is done, man. And that was really discouraging to hear. And it also turned out not to be true. I've always paid my rent in music, and it's a beautiful industry and I love it. And there are a lot of very interesting challenges at the moment that I think we're going to work through and find ourselves on the other end of. But I think the target to keep in our mind's eye as we sort of try to solve these issues is, how do we solve them for the musical middle class?
Love that optimism. Listeners, we've got so many incredible indie venues in town and shows happening all the time. So get on out there, support local music. Chris, John, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Nashville neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our CityCast Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Later.